All right, guys, Boston is bracing for I guess you could call it a political firestorm. And that firestorm is headed by ICE Director Tom Homan. He's leading the way. And he recently promised to bring hell, and that's, of course, his words, not mine, to the streets here, and really wants to confront this, I guess, rising tide of like lawlessness that we're in. And I honestly think that he sees what's going on here. He sees and understands what's happening. And what's happening on the most basic of levels is that our elected officials are prioritizing politics over the citizens of Massachusetts. And now there's three of them. We have Michelle Wu, we have Maura Healey, and we have the police commissioner, Michael Cox, who's like wrapped up into this. And it's unbelievable to me. They're all in this political crosshair now. And I really think that there's some levels of prioritizing these politics over public safety. And, it's a shame that Mike is wrapped up into this. And I don't know if this is truly his beliefs or he's just kind of like following the status quo. I don't know. Anyway, let's watch this video. Somebody sent me this morning.
Boston, where borders are, Tom Homan says he's coming to clean up the streets and clean up law enforcement.
I'm coming to Boston. I'm bringing hell with me.
There you go.
9 child rapists that were in jail in Massachusetts, but rather than honoring an ICE detainer, released them back into the street.
I'm going to pause this for a second. You want to know why? The reason I want to pause this is because there's a large majority of people that don't believe this is true. They don't believe it's true. So they think he's going up here after watching people getting arrested here in Boston, that this is not true. I mean, you really have to have the blinders on in order to think something like this is not happening here.
You're not a police commissioner. Take that badge off your chest, put it in the desk drawer, because you became a politician. You forgot what it's like to be a cop.
There you go.
Boston officials firing back at Homan, saying his efforts are laughable and vowing to, quote, meet him with hell, too. Massachusetts State Senator Peter Durant joins me now. Peter, apologies to our viewers for the horrible language, the HE double hockey sticks references, but all joking aside, will these far-left Boston officials be taking this same tact, talking so tough, when that federal funding goes away?
Well, thanks for having me on, Todd. And I think that clearly it's understandable that Tom Homan is very frustrated with what's going on in Massachusetts right now.
We all are.
The public officials here, whether it's Mayor Wu or Maura Healey, governor of Massachusetts, have been defiant in making Massachusetts a sanctuary state. And so, there's a real showdown coming. But I do think that you're right, that there's a real problem here once we start seeing those funds dry up.
To Homan's point, though, how can someone call themselves a, quote, law enforcement leader and then refuse to cooperate with another law enforcement agency?
There you go.
Yeah, I think it's sad, a state that we're in where they have to refuse to work. Of course, in Massachusetts, we have what's known as the Lund decision, which the Supreme Court of Massachusetts has determined that local law enforcement is not required to work with federal ICE and immigration officials. Now, the problem here, of course, Tom, is that everybody's got a boss, right? And so I don't want to necessarily explicitly blame the commissioner for what he's doing or what he's directed to do.
I feel the same way.
At some point, somebody has to step up and take the bull by the horns here and work with ICE. I mean, I've done a ride along with ICE. I've seen the frustration that they go through. I've seen them try to execute their job here in Massachusetts with little to no help. There's some help that's going on with some of the officials here. Sheriff Lou Evangelitis has been doing a great job in central Massachusetts. But because of that decision, it's really tied law enforcement's hands here, and it's given the power to the politicians.
And State Senator, it leads to situations like this. A Brazilian gang member smiling for the cameras while being arrested by ICE in your state. The fact of the matter is, in all likelihood, he was allowed to continue to be here in our country. Even though this guy actually arrived here legally, he was allowed to stay in our country because of the laws on the books in Massachusetts. So why are so many so-called leaders in your state putting someone like this ahead of law-abiding citizens?
There you go.
Well, that's the $64 million question. And I guess in Massachusetts, it's actually the $2 billion question, because that's what we've been spending on this migrant issue. At the heart of this is a 1983 law, the only law in the country which requires the state to actually house those who come in, those who are homeless. And it's the only right to shelter law here in the United States.
It's being abused.
And so the politicians, Maura Healey and Michelle Wu, they have used this law to basically welcome with open arms anyone that comes into the country. It's estimated in Massachusetts that there are 355,000 illegal immigrants in this state right now. Of course, when you have that number of people who are illegal, there's going to be a lot of bad guys coming into this state, and you're seeing the results of that. We see these stories from ICE come out every single day, and we see this perp walk happening all the time here. It's a shame that it's happening, and really the legislature has to step up and first to reform the Lund decision here in Massachusetts that authorizes the police to work explicitly with ICE, and we actually have to change our politicians to some that are more concerned about the people of Massachusetts rather than those who are in our country illegally.
Well, speaking of changing the politicians, you yourself are considering a run for governor. You mentioned Maura Healey a few times. We will be watching to see if you ultimately make that decision to jump in the race. Massachusetts, as we know, a very blue state. We'll see if Peter Durant can turn
putting it lightly, right? So he's right. Like what's happening is that the sanctuary policies, the right to shelter, so on and so forth, they're essentially being abused. They're not necessarily meant for what has happened or what was happening in Boston and in Massachusetts as a whole. It's really an abuse of the system. And it's really unfortunate. It truly is. It's really a sad circumstances because people like, I think the police commissioner, Michael Cox, kind of has his back or his hands tied behind his back. And I'll say this before, I'll say it again. If what happens in New York is going to potentially determine what happens here. And you really have to ask yourself, will the leaders here, if you want to call them that, in Boston, choose to protect the citizens here or criminals abusing the sanctuary policies? You know, for every leader who stands in front of these cameras to defend this abused system, this sanctuary policy system, there's countless residents here who are concerned. They're concerned about our elected officials' actions, or more importantly, inactions, because they keep on doubling down on the same things. And honestly, for the police commissioner that refuses to work with federal agents, I'm sure there's multiple police officers and correctional officers who are just as frustrated with the process as the citizens are, probably even more frustrated. I mean, how can't you be? I get frustrated watching it. Could you imagine what it's like living it, right? Could you imagine what that's probably like to arrest somebody and then all of a sudden you find out that they've been released back into the public? You know, here's my opinion on this whole thing. I think that any of the decisions our elected officials decide to do moving forward is truly going to define whether or not they remain in office or get reelected. I truly believe that. I really, really do. And honestly, if they get back in, it's really unfortunate that a lot of the residents here are just completely sitting there with their blinders on. I mean, how could you not see what is happening in your backyard? Again, is it going to have to does something have to happen to you or your family or something like that in order for you to understand what is happening? It's unbelievable to me. It really is. And I hope that Mike isn't compromised, right? Because again, like last week, I think I did it on my live where he got on and he was talking, you know, about following the law, so on and so forth. And again, you know, it's the tale of two truths at the same time. Yeah, you're following the law, but you're also releasing criminals back onto the street. You know, you're following what these sanctuary policies bring. And, you know, as this gentleman said, I think that somebody needs to take the bull by the horn. Somebody needs to step up, right? Somebody needs to do something. And it has to come, it has to come from Mike, or it has to come from somebody at that level, right? And just put their foot down and say, like, we need to do something about this, guys. This is a problem. 350, I think he said 355,000 illegal immigrants here. It's not good. It's not good. Anyway, that's it for today's video, guys. I'll see you on the next one.